Welcome back to all those of you who've made it this far in the day. Before we continue with the last panel for the day, there's a short video to be played.
All the fans from Mumbai who came and watched us, thank you so much for all the encouragement. It means the world to us. But today I'm making this video not for you guys. I'm going to speak, appeal and request all of you who did not come. To everyone who is not a football fan, please come and watch us. 2 reasons. Number 1, it's the best game in the world. And number 2, we play for our country. We'll make sure that once you come to watch us, you will not go the same person back home. To all of you who are fans of big European clubs and support your European clubs with so much passion. And sometimes you guys think that the level is not same, so why to waste your time? Agreed, the level is not the same, not even close. But with our desire and determination, we'll make sure, we'll try our best to make your time worth. To all of you who have lost hope or do not have any hope in Indian football, I request you, come and watch us in the stadiums. I mean, it's not fun to criticize or abuse on internet. Come to the stadium, do it on our face, scream at us, shout at us, abuse us. Who knows, one day, we might change you guys. You might start cheering for us. Please come. To all of you who are fans but could not come, did not come, delay, work, school, please come and watch in the stadiums. Come and watch us in the stadiums. You guys have no idea how important you guys are and how important your support is. So today I'm requesting you, all of you, 4th, 7th and hopefully 10th June we are playing in Mumbai. Please come and support us, encourage us, watch us, abuse us, criticize us, talk about the game, go back home, have discussions, make panels, but please get involved. This is a very, very important time and juncture in Indian football, and football in India needs you guys. So here I'm requesting you, please come and watch us in the stadium. Now in Mumbai, and whenever we play, wherever we play, if you're in the same city, come to the stadiums and watch us. Please. Jai Hind.
So for those of you who don't know, when this tweet was put out, last year, 2018. Yeah. It was the most shared, it was the highest engaged tweet across Twitter in India, across sport. No cricket tweet, no other sport tweet did as well as this appeal from Sunil Chhetri. If I had 10 rupees for every time I was asked how to navigate a job into sports, I'd be able to put my logo or my name on the Indian cricket team jersey. Well, that's until Baiju spoiled the plan. As mentioned earlier, football in India is seeing a huge uptick in growth. The effects of this growth are felt both on and off the field. If you would like to see yourself working in football law and administration here in India, in Asia or anywhere else in the world, we have quite the treat for you. To help you navigate a career in football law and administration, I would like to invite the following people onto the panel. Mr. Mark Hovell, partner and head of the sports team Mills and Reeve LLP. Mr. John Loffhagen, consultant at Onside Law. Mr. James Kitching, founder and managing director, Kitching Sports. Ms. Namrata Chatterjee, legal counsel, Asian Football Confederation. The panel was also supposed to feature Mr. Roshan Gopalakrishna. A lot of us who have interacted with him, unfortunately, he had an untimely injury and couldn't make it. And the panel will be moderated by Mr. Srinivvasan Gopalakrishnan, Head of Strategy at Reliance Sports.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day, as we call it, the last 20 minutes of a football match, which is always very, very exciting, depending on which team is playing. So we've had an awesome day, and unfortunately, Roshan, I believe, had a football injury, correct? That's what I was told. Otherwise, this would have been even between Indian players and foreign players. Otherwise, this looks like an ISL club team from when it started, right? More foreigners than Indians. We thought there would be a balance today, but Roshan spoiled it for us. So, without much ado, I'll just sort of start with the lady. So, and I'll come to each one of you. What's your favorite football moment? Playing, or watching, reading, or thinking?
No, I mean, for me, probably my favorite football moment was when Chelsea won the Champions League, because it was such a difficult season. And then, without having a full-time manager at the time, to finally see the team I've supported so much to win that Champions League was, I think, a big moment.
No, whatever you said, you'll hear lots of oohs and ahs from the crowd. Huh? What about you, James?
Thanks, Nam. Before I answer your question, I need to do two things which I forgot before. The first one was Mr. Biplav Gautam from Sport Radar. I'm just want to thank him for his hospitality as well. He asked me to give him a shout. Thanks, Biplav. For all those people in the crowd that have been asking me questions about football, careers in football, etc., you have an absolute rock star here in Namrata who's just finished up at the AFC, so that's your target, okay? In terms of football, there's three memories really which stick with me. The first one was my first match. So I was 5 or 6 years old and my family went to a match at what's still there, Highmarsh Stadium in Adelaide, because I'm from Adelaide originally. It was Adelaide City versus a club now called Melbourne Knights, but at the time they were Melbourne, Croatia. And from that moment on, I think I was about 5 years old, I was absolutely transfixed with the sport. My second big moment came in 2005 in November. Australia had long sought to participate in the World Cup, and in November 2005, after 32 years of heartbreak, growing up with some dramatic results in the previous two qualification series, we finally qualified for a World Cup, and basically it's the only time I've ever seen Adelaide, which is a very sleepy old town, spontaneously explode into a mass party. So everyone was watching it at their house or the bar or the pub, and then everyone just entered into the city and people were chanting and cheering and supporting all night. And the cops were doing that with us too, so that was all right. And the last real memory I have was, and I've told him about this recently, was AFC Champions League semi-final in 2008. I was there with my hometown club, Adelaide United, playing against a club called Kruvchi, who are now Bunyakor in Uzbekistan, and Adelaide United won the match 3-0. But the moment which stands out was Robbie Cornthwaite, a central defender. I'm not sure if he played in India. He did play in Korea and Malaysia for a long time. It was one of his first seasons in football, and Rivaldo was playing for Kruvchi on the other side, and Cornthwaite got him with an absolutely beauty of a tackle. And Cornthwaite's about 6'4", and it's like his third professional game. And he's just standing over him, like doing like that, and we're all like, "It's Rivaldo." But then we loved it, and it was great, and that's always stuck with me as a great moment. So yeah,
awesome. John, before you start, England are 53 for 1.
Not bad. Take that. Well, some good and bad memories. The agony and ecstasy of 1990, when I was trying to do my Law Society finals. 2 exams a day, and England are playing West Germany in the semi-final. I mean, you're just not going to revise, and then it goes to extra time. And of course, we don't go through, so then you're not going to revise either. 1996, beating Scotland. I was lucky enough to be at Wembley that day, watching Gascoigne score that goal. 1998, and this was a bad memory, and I was at the Stadio Olimpico when we, I think, drew with Italy to qualify for the 1998 World Cup. And at that point, you know, there was talk of racism in football and this, that, and the other. And you know, naively, I thought perhaps the accusations of monkey chants, whatever, were exaggerated to some extent. And we were sat in the Italian section of the crowd, and I think the England team had probably Sol Campbell, Paul Ince, maybe, I can't remember the title, but a couple of black players anyway. And some of the monkey chanting was disgusting. And this was at a time when Italy was bidding for the Olympics. And I sat there and I really thought, really? You know, what, are you going to do the same thing when they're running around the track? That was my lowest point, but let's focus on the other two. Much more fun.
Good man.
Well, I'd like to say it was involved in me playing football, but I've got two left feet, so it was the memory that stands out for me was actually when I had sort of mixed feelings, because my club, as you know, is Leeds United, and Leeds United have been out of the Premier League now for 15 years, and during that time they've gone bankrupt into administration twice. And both times, one of my roles on behalf of the players is to negotiate with the administrators to make sure they get paid. And the first time I did it, I had to go down to the training ground and meet all the players and effectively say, guys, you're not going to get paid in full, probably for the next 6 months. We're going to negotiate to try and get you a portion of your money paid. So I'm sort of getting the speech ready to go and see my heroes, all the players that I go and watch on a Saturday, but try and be all professional about it. So I sort of walk into the gym, and they're all just arsing around as players do, and somebody will give me a cup of tea. So I've got a cup of tea in like a little in my hand as I'm walking in, and I can just see from the distance this ball coming from one end of the gym in a perfect circle, and it just smashes straight into me and knocks this cup of tea all over me, and everybody just goes, oh. And then I look at me, and I just said, Eric Bakker, if you could do that on a Saturday, we wouldn't be in this bloody mess.
Considering we don't have that gentleman who holds up the card saying 5 minutes left, I'm going to recite my favorite football in my memory also. So, yes, I'm wearing the India t-shirt now, in the India jersey, one of my favorites at this point in time. And I changed from cricket to football because it's about football and it'll not be right wearing an MI jersey. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of football memories. United beating Tottenham multiple times, after being a few goals down. Watching my heroes play, watching Rooney play live, Messi, Ronaldo play live right in front of your eyes. But the best moment which supersedes all of that is when my 6.5-year-old son represented school for the first time in an under-8 tournament. He wore a jersey. He couldn't run because his knee was blocking it. So we had to cut the jersey in the middle of the match to ensure that he played. So I think that supersedes pretty much every memory that you've seen all over the world. So coming back to slightly serious stuff. So John, we'll start with you. How and why did you get into football, law, and administration?
Well, mine started with leaving private practice. Well, when I was in law, I started working in a corporate commercial firm. We had one or two clients that were sports related. They sold and distributed gym kit, and they had one or two sponsors, David Seaman amongst others. So I was kind of flirting with some kind of association with sport, and then I left there to join IMG when IMG wanted to get into football, the player side of football, in a big and a quick way through acquisition. And they were looking for someone with their normal hire was like a relatively junior commercial law, but this time they were looking for someone a little bit more senior, someone who had corporate experience. And that just fitted me perfectly. I just read this ad and thought I simply have to at least try for that job because that just looks like me. And I was lucky enough to get it, and we bought a number of businesses. Generally player representation businesses, largely totally unsuccessfully. We bought entrepreneurs who were either corrupt or didn't want to be bought and still thought they were entrepreneurs, or both. Largely, they didn't succeed at all. We had a lot of fun doing it, and that was my introduction to football.
Nice. What about you, Namrata?
Actually, so for me, it's very interesting because when I was still in law school, the first time I was always interested in sports, but when I just heard about sports law coming up as like a separate branch of law, so to say, I was like, I want to explore it. And it all started with an internship with Law NK. So that was the very first time I was actually like...
The home of sports law.
Yes, pretty much. So that's where I first time interned with them, got exposure to sports law. Thereafter, I went to intern with Mukul Mudgal. So while in law school, I was just exploring with internships. But after that, I was just working at Amarchand for a few years. And then I decided, but now I want to do a specialization in sports and then full-fledged go into working in sports. So I did the FIFA Master. And after the FIFA Master, it's where I was FIFA Master, obviously, it was very international and a lot of sports, not just football, but obviously football was the most, taught about and most talked about also. So that's why football law came at the forefront while doing the FIFA Master. And then thereafter, again, during the FIFA Master, James came to teach us, and he was at the Asian Football Confederation at the time. So then that sparked my interest towards, okay, AFC is doing so much in Asian football, and got to know more about it actually when he came to speak. And thereafter I ended up being hired by him, and I was working for him initially. Then he left on to start his own practice, but that's how I basically joined.
It's got nothing to do with Chelsea.
Football, obviously, was like I said, my love for football actually started with watching the 2002 World Cup and with Michael Ballack. So from that, it was Chelsea, and then...
Nice, there's a connection. So, Mark, considering you've been such a huge, football's been such an integral part of your life with Leeds while growing up, what does a typical day in your life look like?
Ooh, busy. I suppose it's probably best to look at what you sort of do in a typical week. I probably roughly half my time these days is sitting as an arbitrator. So a lot of cases, the Court of Arbitration, but also domestic cases in England. We have Rule K cases, commercial cases, National Anti-Doping Panel cases. I probably do about maybe 40 arbitrations a year. So that's a big part of what I do. But I also run a practice within Mills and Reeve. We've got, I'd say, a core team now of 8 lawyers who are just doing sports law work on a daily basis across different disciplines. And then wider than that, we've got a sort of secondary team of about another 40 lawyers. So like a pensions lawyer may do about 5% of their time on sports work. But I have to sort of manage that team, find work for that team. So, and it comes from every sport you can imagine. Football is obviously the main sport in England. It's probably, if you compare that sport with every other sport there is, they're about equal. So it has pretty much 50% of the market. But I've done some pretty weird sports as well. I think my weirdest one was I did a pigeon doping case.
Which sport?
So this is pigeons. So it's actually in England, they're called pigeon fanciers. So they basically race pigeons, and you put them in a lorry, you drive them 300 miles away from home, and then you let them go, and the first one that comes back to where you started wins. And this has been going on for years. My granddad used to race pigeons from Hull when he was a lad, a long time ago.
Bollywood has songs on it, by the way.
There you go. But people discovered that actually, if you started to give your pigeons caffeine, then they would fly quicker. And now they've started to discover that if you give them cocaine, they go really fast. but unfortunately, they tend to die. So, but mine was a caffeine case where we managed to get the pigeon off.
James?
It's like I said before, isn't it? If there's a rule, people will try find a way to break it.
Exactly.
Let's feed our pigeons cocaine and see how far they fly. I think from a day-to-day perspective, it's easier probably to talk rather than a sort of, or a weekly perspective, rather than a day-to-day perspective. So what we do is we advise across all sort of facets of sport. So not the sort of the quasi-legal stuff that I was talking about before, but also strategy, consulting, and sort of business as well. To give you an example of today, while some of the presentations were going on, I had one client in the Middle East get in touch because his club had just lost a FIFA DRC case and wanted to know the next steps. I had another client whose transfer window is closing tomorrow, and you might have seen me out there on the laptop, so frantically assisting him on some FIFA regulatory issues. they're from a country where they perhaps, because English is not a spoken language there, clubs there tend to often get trapped into contracts which are drafted by people in Europe who know how to manipulate the regulations to earn a little bit of extra money or avoid any of their sort of standard regulatory obligations. There is also, I had a notification from CAS in a case that one of our people is working on. And then one of the guys that works with me is currently at a regional federation in Australia, assisting them on some strategic projects, and I was reading his update while I was outside. So it's really varied in terms of what we do. 98% of our work is in football, just because that's, to be blunt, where the money is in international sport. And probably 95% of the work we do is international as well. It's very rare that we do work in Australia with respect to those types of issues. Those issues tend to crop up overseas.
How many of these, like a week or a day, are more of crisis than happy things?
I think most, I suppose I'd say the majority are crisis. I mean, most people don't wake up in the morning and think, I want to go and instruct a lawyer. Typically it's because, crap, something's happened and I've got to instruct a lawyer, or we're having a big fallout. But, not always. I mean, we do sort of corporate work for footballers who are buying businesses that they're interested in. You can be, I'm not sure if entering into a prenup is happy, but it usually means that you're about to get married. So we look at those sort of things. It's quite a sort of range of work that we'll do within the sports sector. I mean, I suppose I head up a sports sector. So if somebody is doing a house move for a footballer, I'll say that's sports law because it goes in my numbers and I get paid that way. But equally, the bigger cases are usually distressed if you're a regulatory lawyer.
James?
What he said, because I'm
Same ratio?
Well, I predominantly work in regulatory and governance, so happy is very rare. So if anyone has seen our social media channels, my guy who manages that is awesome, and we've got a hashtag called Football Never Sleeps, and that hashtag unfortunately does not refer to happy at all. So and given that we're in Australia as well, some of us are in Australia, and our clients tend to be across Asia, we actually literally do not ever sleep, because we'll get that email or phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning about something which needs to be fixed yesterday. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Namrata? Considering you're the youngest in this group, so what would how would you describe, the path of a football lawyer? What are the possible career trajectories, number of jobs, how important is a master's degree? I'll come to them with specific questions, but from your perspective, considering you're sort of just starting, can someone be only a football lawyer? Do you have to be football plus? So just sort of shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting time to answer this question for me personally, because for the last almost 2.5 years, I was working with the Asian Football Confederation, and I just finished with them 2 days ago. And I'm still a consultant for them, but I just finished being a legal counsel in that capacity just 2 days ago. So I'm also in that transitory phase again. But I explained to you how I came to this path. So, but I'll speak a little more about the masters first, because that was doing that masters was what actually shaped my finally getting into the industry. So, I mean, before that, there was obviously a lot of interest. There was a lot of, passion is a word people use very loosely, but there was that, passion to work in sports because, I loved being the spectator. I loved doing that, but I hadn't yet explored it full-time working, because what happens is a lot of times when you're at the outside, you find sports law and all of this very glamorous. So that's why most of the people want to get into it. But obviously, once you're inside, it's a lot of work, and it's you're not really like, you would expect you'll be watching football matches all the time and just meeting famous footballers and this and that. I mean, that may happen also.
That's a myth.
But of course, that doesn't happen all the time. And if you do meet them, it's to solve some crisis. Like, it's like when you have the footballer in front of you to defend his case, which you are prosecuting him against. So it's not like the most, this thing. But yeah, just to start with, so the FIFA Master, I shortlisted a lot of like sports law related masters that was going on around the time. There was the ISDE Masters, there was like FIFA Masters, etc. But finally, I went through with the FIFA Master. And we actually have like 5-6 of us alumni here in this room today. So that really helped me, like, because it was not just about like studying, like it was not about just what you were taught in the classroom, but I mean, firstly, it was like 3 different disciplines. So humanities of sports, sports management, and sports law. So it gave you a wider ambit of like, the whole sport industry and not just limited to sports law. And it was a very international like outlook. Like the class was 32 people from 28 different nationalities. So the cultural exchanges, knowing about different sports, different this thing was what makes it even more like, interesting. Then, and the contacts you get there, it's like you have 400, 500 odd alumni working across the world in different sports, in different positions, like lawyers to accountants to managers, like really. So that's why I think the masters was very important in that sense, to then get into the industry. Like it forms you that background where now people will at least give that credibility to, or that foot, like, because before that there are a lot of people who would say, I'm interested to do this, but the competition is also quite high. So to make you at least be connected in the industry, to get inside, I think this masters is quite helpful. So that's what I would answer about the masters bit that you asked.
John, so just taking off from that point, because you've worked in India for quite some time, and you see, the as you said, the passion as well as the for sports is growing, and of course, considering the sports market in India is growing, you need a lot of people, who work around those sports in ancillary, services to sports. So, how important is it to sort of understand for allied skills to understand, say commercial or say a whole lot of other fields, sports management, whatever? How important is that along with law?
Well, I think it's very important. Really, I mean, I think obviously you need to know the basic principles of the sports law wherever you're practicing, but unless you are in academia, you don't practice in a vacuum. And I think particularly if you are in-house, whether you're in a federation or working for a company, then you're not surrounded by lawyers, you're part of a team, and you simply have to understand their business to be able to properly assist them. Otherwise, you're effectively just describing in hypothetical terms situations. When you're properly doing your job, to me, you end up, even at times if you have to say to someone you can't do something because X, Y, and Z, then the good lawyer, if they possibly can, will say, but have you thought about ABC? And you can only do that if you understand that business. And actually that, to me, when I went in-house, I was delighted to go in-house. I got to the point where A, it suited me domestically, we just had kids and everything else, but B, more importantly, I found it incredibly frustrating, the example I gave about the client who had some sports practice. Every time they spoke to me, I charged them a fortune. So not surprisingly, they didn't want to speak to me unless they had to. And I found that incredibly frustrating, and what I found when I went in-house was, then you're just part of the team. And when for example, when we were working for hours and hours and hours in 2007, through the autumn of 2007, trying to plan for IPL, just doing that in a legal vacuum would have been pointless. You had to know every aspect that you possibly could of how IPL might play out from a sponsorship point of view, from a franchise point of view, what the broadcast was going to be. We really tried to plan everything, what time the games were going to be on. And this was at the time when we first started, and I'd never been to India, but obviously started coming regularly to India. But yeah, absolute knowledge of, and I think it's important in private practice as well, of course, to know your client's business. But if you're in-house, it's utterly essential.
James, what are the best and not so best parts about your job?
Good question. Look, there are fringe benefits from working in sport, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes you do meet famous footballers, not Michael Ballack, but there is a photo of me with the original and the best Ronaldo when I first met him. And so, yes, you do get to, meet some of your heroes, whether they are Eric Backer or Ronaldo. Look, the worst parts of it, I think it's no different to working with any other type of client and any other type of consulting. When you are working with a client and maybe what they want to achieve, you can't get that over the line, or there's something which is 50-50 and you fall on the wrong side of the 50. The losses that come with the wins. And one thing I think a lot of people forget about sport, particularly when you're dealing with athletes, and actually, the guy who said this to me is in the room at the back of the room, Brendan Schwab up there. Actually, he won't remember this at all, but we had a phone conversation about 3 years ago, and we were talking about something, and he asked me how old I was, and it was my early 30s at that time. It was about 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was. And he goes, "Don't forget that the athletes are all younger than you. So a lot of the time you're dealing with young kids. You remember how you were when you were 20 years old or 21 years old, and these are guys that have worked their asses off for the last 10 years of their lives, or 5 or 6 years of their lives, to try and achieve something and win something. And they're in high pressure situations all the time. And sometimes, especially when you're dealing with people of with the athletes, particularly when they're young athletes and things don't go their way as they may want, that's when I think it really hits home. When you're dealing with people who are a bit more seasoned and they know how the world works, that's okay, but especially in that scenario. Yeah.
Great point. Mark?
Good and bad points. On the whole, it's good. I suppose I'm in a big law firm, and I look at some of my colleagues who do things like probate law. So somebody dies, and their clients are all fighting over the dead person's money, like within about a day. And you're thinking, like, really? You want to do that for 40 years? I'm glad that none of them are here to hear me say this. But so it's a real privilege to actually be able to work in a sector that you're passionate about. As I say, I was hopeless at football, 2 left feet, but it doesn't mean I don't love sport and love football and love being involved in it. This is my way of being involved in it, is to actually be a lawyer in this crazy industry. So on the whole, it's just really good. And it's absolute pain in the backside trying to get a file opened and trying to get a footballer to give you any money laundering information and things like that, all the bureaucracy. But you get that by just working in a legal firm anyway. I think we're just incredibly privileged to be working in this sector.
Awesome. John?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I don't miss my days in private practice working all night on IPOs and M&A work. I've been incredibly lucky. When people used to ask me why I enjoyed working at IMG at the time, it was largely because I really liked the people I worked with. When we used to come to India and spend time, we'd work hard, but then we'd go and have a couple of beers or something to eat, and that was a pleasure as well. So it was, and IPL is the best thing to date that I've worked on. We had some litigation in Switzerland with one of the football businesses, which went disastrously wrong. That was a low point a couple of times during that. But, like you say, Mark, really, no, this has been a privilege. And a privilege, to be working in a different country and get to know a different country as well as, just added kind of, yeah.
Namrata, you've told us the best part of your job. Now tell us the not so best part of it.
No, obviously when I was saying, even when we are at the competition, etc., like on the venue, so coming to the good part there was that, yeah, we do get to watch the match and everything. And like maybe you started with asking me about the good memories. One of them also was made very recently involving the Indian football team. I was at the Asian Cup, and mostly when I'm like, I was with AFC, India wasn't participating in most of the tournaments, etc. So I wasn't really, feeling that like that apprehension before any match. I was more neutral, just doing my work. But when India was playing at the Asian Cup and when they won that match against Thailand, of course, it was a very good memory and it felt good. But thereafter, when we went back, the not so good part started, when you have to look through all the reports, take the disciplinary action, and even there you have to be neutral, and even against your own country or the players who represent, because this thing, you do have to do your job and go ahead and prosecute them for anything that has gone wrong in the match, any regulatory violation that happens. So of course, it's still a lot better, this in-house thing and working in sports, than earlier when I was at a law firm doing due diligences for weeks and weeks and weeks. So even if I have sleepless nights here, it ultimately feels good to be having that sleepless night for something which ultimately makes you happy. So.
Awesome. So Mark, I'll go to all of you here. 3 points. Three pieces of advice for those considering a career in sports law, especially in a developing football country like India.
3, not 2. Okay. No, well, I guess if people want to be, I suppose we probably all hear quite a lot. People will come up and say, I want to be a sports lawyer, a football lawyer, sports lawyer. I don't know whether it's quite as easy as that these days. I think you probably have to look at what type of lawyer you want to be first. So do you want to be an employment lawyer, an IP lawyer, a corporate lawyer? So find where you fit, but find a firm that actually does sports law, and then try and actually use those skills to be of use to the client base, to the sports sector. A lot of people just want to go straight in to say, I just want to act for footballers. It's a bit like my son actually hates sport. He loves music, and he's 16. You ask him what he wants to do, he says, Dad, I want to have my own record label. And it's like, well, okay, it might be possible these days. And I've got a really good friend who acts for lots of musicians, but he's an accountant. And he's far more interested in my friend than me, my son. And he says, can you get me a job there? I said, yeah, I can get you a job there. And what he doesn't realize is that the job is going to be looking at famous rock stars, receipts, and putting them all into order. He's not actually going to go and have a cup of tea with the rock star straight away.
You don't drink tea.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I think it's a bit of patience. I think you have to actually sort of understand what type of law you want to do, go after it, but try and find yourself an environment where you can express it with and work with sports people. So I think that was 2.
James?
I thought I had more time to think then. Look, I think, maybe I can talk a little bit from my experience, but what drove me was really a passion for sport and a desire to be involved in sport. And that passion and desire, particularly football, which is, the sport I grew up loving. But that passion and desire really can be manifested in a number of ways. I think you have to be honest with yourself and your limitations and where you are. And you have to be willing to take great leaps as well, leaps of faith in yourself. You need to back yourself and what you do. So for me, coming from Adelaide, which is, like I said, it's a nice town in Australia, but it's quite sleepy. You can tell from my physique that I wasn't an ex-professional footballer or athlete. A lot of, I looked around the industry, and a lot of the jobs in Australia in sort of that field are in sport were taken up by people who are ex-athletes or connected with ex-athletes or from the bigger cities. So for me, I sort of plotted out a pathway, and that pathway involved taking a leap of faith overseas to do a master, leaving behind my job and seeing where that would take me. And the next thing really I'd say about that then is if you do take that leap of faith and you go out and back yourself, then you have to put the work in as well while you're there. Simply doing a master internationally is no guarantee of any success. You have to still put the hard work in, put your head down, network, study, network, be up to date with the industry, network. But at the same time, your pathway is not going to be, or probably is not going to be as conventional as you think it is. I ended up in Kuala Lumpur 3 days after my master finished because a guy who I'd spoken to as part of my master's thesis needed a lawyer with a financial services background because he was running a corruption investigation into an individual that involved reading a lot of bank statements. It had nothing to do really with my having done a sports master, but because he'd been involved in assisting me with my thesis, which was on employment-related disputes in sport, I came to his mind and I was asked to come do a 1-month consultancy and ended up living there for 5.5 years. So, and that's really sort of, I think, the key takeaway, because I see a lot of people ask me that question. I was saying to Mark before, I'm thinking of shutting down my LinkedIn because literally I get asked that question at least twice a week. But the reality is there's no one conventional path, but you back yourself, you understand this is what I want to do, and you take all necessary measures, you study and take all necessary measures to go down that path, and you network. You network and you make sure you speak to the right people as well. So you've got to be strategic about it, and then things might fall into place. You might get a random phone call from the other side of the world, when you're in a pub in Switzerland. So yeah.
Awesome. John, you worked so much in the Indian market, which is pretty much quite chaotic, right? So from an Indian perspective, if I were to add a filter of India in it,
I think the same principles probably apply. I'd echo what Mark and James said. Gary Player, the legendary golfer, used to say, that the harder I practice, the luckier I get. And I think there's a huge amount of truth in that. I think the same principles probably apply, certainly, although I think actually with India probably getting to a tipping point in terms of the grassroots sport growing, just the activation, the number of sports that are taking off and developing. I think the market for sports law is probably as good here as anywhere else. There certainly aren't as many as there are in, say, the UK, US, etc. I used to get people coming to me as well saying, how do I get into it? They're doing property law or probate or some godforsaken practice that's boring the hell out of them, and they want to do sports law. And I said, well, what have you done so far? And the answer was sometimes they just spoke to the likes of me, but others had said, well, I'm thinking of doing this masters. There used to be one at King's College. There are various ones, as well as the ones abroad. And I said, well, absolutely do that, because otherwise you're just someone who wants to do sport. And we all, lots of people like sport, but differentiate yourself. And there's one of the main reasons I used to say that, it comes back to what you were saying, you network. It's not just the study, which shows some commitment and everything else to a potential employer, but you get to meet people in the business, and there's no better way. And just stick at it. If all of these people that you see succeed in any walk of life. And I was at a talk yesterday, a guy called Raoul Bose I just happened to bump into him in the gym. I knew him from a couple of things. He was giving a talk last night at the Ritz-Carlton on excellence, and he gave a couple of examples of when he'd been completely knocked back in certain circumstances and dusted himself off and carried on. And you just simply don't succeed, pretty much probably in anything, if you give up when the going gets tough. You've got to keep going, and like you say, back yourself.
Awesome. Words of inspiration. Namrata.
One thing I'll say is that, of course, it's important, firstly, like a lot of you have said it, but to be a good lawyer first, like become a good lawyer, because even when you're working with sports law, it will still involve interpreting regulations and like all that you saw today, the RSTP and all of this. So if you're a good lawyer, you can go ahead and work through all these regulations and this thing. And another thing which I faced was, you will initially be discouraged by a lot of people to probably go down this path, because most people think it's a lot of risk, leaving the more stable options. Yeah. So doing anything a little different, which is not so widespread yet, you will be discouraged. But then at that time, if you really want this, then find ways to make it happen, and reach out to some of the good mentors. Like I was lucky to have, he's not here right now, but I would like to give a shout out to Roshan, because he was my very first sports law mentor in that sense. And he guided me even after, like, I interned with them some 8 years ago, but throughout he's always been there as a mentor and, you know, somebody who's guided me. And then there was James. So I mean, I was pretty lucky to have these kind of people who helped me to, you know, trace out a good career path. But otherwise, like, it's gonna get tough at times. So if you really want it, don't give up on it. And I think ultimately you will get through somewhere. And one more little thing, keep reading and writing on it. Like, don't lose the, you know, focus out of it. Don't go out of the industry or the, you know, knowledge that's going on. It's very important to, at least, because like it all links with networking, that when you're networking, when you're talking to people, you should at least know what's happening in sports law. You should be aware, so you can go network with people, have a conversation. They can see that, yeah, you're well read in this. You have, like, it's one thing to say I'm interested, and it's another thing to show that you're interested. So I think that will work.
Very well said. Mark, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I just think, hopefully what you can see here as well is the passion that people really have for the sector and for the sport. So I think you're right, you've got to back yourself, you've got to believe yourself. But if not, then, you know, the good thing about being a probate lawyer is that everybody dies. So there's loads of work to go at there. Yeah.
So last question before we last point before we open the floor for questions. Start with Yuma. A memorable incident that you would like to share. If you don't want to share names, if you have client confidentiality issues, you can say A, B, X, Y, Z.
Yeah, well, again, I'm going to stick with my theme here, which is Leeds United. Probably most of you won't know, so you can Google this guy. But when I was a kid growing up, Tony Curry was the best player ever. And when I sort of started my law firm, and I was sort of developing the football work, we got a phone call in saying Tony Curry wants to use the firm. But it was because he was getting divorced, and I know absolutely nothing about divorce law. So I got one of my partners, who is the divorce law specialist, and said, right, I've got you a new client. We're going to meet him. You shut up and say nothing, like, for the first 5 minutes, because I just want to meet my hero. So I got to, like, talk to him for about 5 minutes. And then when he started asking tough questions about divorce, I sort of passed him over, went back to a cup of coffee.
Nice. Namrata.
Okay, so I mean, again, I won't be taking any names and all, but one of the, like, you know,
We'll guess.
I mean, one of the most, like, you know, first cases that I was working at when I went to AFC involved, like we have so many regulations that, like, yeah, cases and violations can be from anything. So one of the very first I had to work on involved regulations relating to the meals being served at the, you know, competition to the match officials, etc. The club had to arrange for, like, we have even standards and regulations stipulated for the kind of meals and the kind of, like, you know, nutritious or whatever meals, etc. that have to be served. And in that particular instance, it wasn't served as per the appropriate standard. So while preparing for that case, I literally had to read the entire menu of that, you know, hotel, and that was the kind of, like, evidence I was fighting out, whether this is meeting international standards, comparing with different menu cards across, like, you know, this thing. And so, yeah, and it also received, like, after we had the regulation, I mean, it was a violation at the end of the day, and we had to, like, go out and get a sanction for it, but it was taken out very badly in the media of the particular country the club belonged to, with that, oh, AFC is only involved in, like, you know, having cases to do with meals and this and that rather than, like, other things. So people started to change the narrative, but there was a lot of hard work that actually went behind even that case, because it was ultimately a violation, and it was important why we had to proceed with that.
John?
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out whether I should say this example, but
I'm closing my ears.
yeah, no, well, I was telling someone else about it.
Is it about IPL or ISL?
The former, potentially, but you can't quote me on that.
Okay.
I was giving evidence at some disciplinary proceedings I was called to give evidence against the former guy who used to be involved in IPL. And we got quite close to this chap whose name I won't mention. And so we were called to give evidence against him. And, well, a couple of things actually were memorable about that. One of the ones was being interrupted. There were two of us lawyers from IMG who'd been called to give evidence, and being interrupted and having to split the proceedings because we had to fly down to Bombay because two guys turned up at the hotel in Delhi and said, you have to be at the Enforcement Directorate within 48 hours or you won't be able to leave the country. And you can imagine how we were thinking at that point was, right, we better get to Mumbai. But anyway, we were finishing up after a long day in Delhi, and I was being cross-examined by this chap's lawyers. And as I say, I was quite a big fan of this guy. We'd worked together. I quite liked him. And, really my affections were probably more for him than the people who had asked me to give evidence. But anyway, so on a personal level. And it was a rough day. And his lawyer, I thought, was being a bit of an arse, if you excuse my language. And he and I fell out towards the end of the day. He basically accused me of being a liar, and I didn't take kindly to that. And so anyway, we go to the airport in Delhi, and we're sat and I'm still fuming inside. I think I'll grab a cold beer. And I get a text on my phone from the guy who's happened to be in London, might still be there, and saying, I hear it was a rough day. Nothing personal, all part of the game. And I just thought, wow, that just sums up this whole roller coaster that's been IPL. Yeah, I'll never forget that.
I'm sure everybody's guessed.
Well,
all parties involved here.
As long as it doesn't appear in the Times of India tomorrow, I don't know.
This is being streamed, I think, so you'll
get another text just now.
Can hear the vibration. Look, there's been so many memorable moments over the last sort of 7 years working in this space. One which I still kind of shake my head at, so I'm not sure if it was serious or not, was actually last year I was chairing an ethics panel for an international federation, and you can work that out if you want to delve deep enough. And the hearing was happening, and the hearing was related to match fixing. And one of the key pieces of evidence was the International Federation had obtained the WhatsApp messages between the player who had been charged with the violations and another player who he had approached and asked to fix the matches. And the messages were pretty blatant. I mean, there could be no doubt, I think, or the judgment certainly says there's no doubt in, what they mean. And we sort of got to the end of one evidence point, and for whatever reason, I, as the chair, said, look, I just want to read this message out one more time. And so I read this message, and at the end of this final message, and this is a lesson in don't speak when you shouldn't speak. At the end of the message, there was an emoji, and everyone sort of knows the emoji. You know the emoji of two hands together like this. Now, most people would presume it means please, right? Someone writes something and they put that at the end of it and they're asking a question. It means please follow through with it. So I read the message out and it said blah, 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 please emoji. And then counsel for the player said, no, that's a prayer. He's praying, sir. And I kind of looked at him, and then I looked at the counsel for the federation, and then it was on. I just sat back and didn't say. They fought for 10 minutes about whether this was a please or a prayer emoji, and we basically had to cut 10 minutes out of our break later on. And at the end of it, I actually asked both of them, what were you thinking? Like, outside, I said, is it a please or a prayer? And neither of them had an actual answer for me. So I'm still not sure whether that was just two lawyers taking the piss a little bit, and with a guy who had very obviously fixed matches, having a little bit of fun, or they were actually thought that the emoji was going to make a significant difference in how we were going to decide that case. But that's one that sticks with me still to this day. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed this session. And big round of applause for these guys. Come on. Rarely will you get a panel like this, mixture of youth and experience. Yeah. Worked in pretty much.
Where does the youth stop?
I really need to know that.
You guys need to decide.
You're the only one with the internet.
It's like that emoji. You guys have to decide. So I think you should make best use of this opportunity by asking them questions. And it's not limited to 1 or 2 or 3 questions. You can ask as many questions as you want to till they shut off these lights. So please fire away.
Good evening. I have a question to Mr. Mark Hovell. Basically, in your presentation, you mentioned the term financial fair play regulation in the UEFA model. I have a question regarding in the last 6 months, the term financial fair play regulation has been a lot in the media because of the FIFA leaks and the Der Spiegel comments on the Manchester City. So I have a question that what is your take on the model? Because the model is not perfect. It's quite flawed a bit because it violates the competition law of European treaty, the Treaty of European Union, the sections I think 101 and 102 of Treaty of European Union, which is violates and under the as it promotes anti-competition laws. Plus, the financial play regulation prohibits a particular team's owner to invest the money in the break-even policy. So those situations creates generally a market in which the big European clubs are being favored, while the smaller European clubs are not able to raise the money to compete. Even in the revenue system, actually, the distribution of the revenue is based on the population of a particular country. So what's your take on the entire model, and do you consider it's as perfect as it's put out in the media quite a bit?
How long have we got? Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that UEFA are going to agree with what you've just said, that it's in breach of EU competition law. Certainly, people have made those allegations, but I suppose where there have been cases to look at that, there was the Galatasaray case that came to CAS, and Galatasaray lost. In the UK, probably a harder fought case was the QPR case, and QPR lost. So the regulations have sort of withheld those arguments at the moment, but I can see those arguments as time goes on, because I think financial fair play has actually been a real success. It was set out there to try and stop the clubs hemorrhaging as much money as they were, and trying to get clubs to live on their own means as opposed to living on their owners' means is not a bad idea. There's still quite a bit of tolerance there, and that clubs can spend an extra 30 million if they want. So I can see there's, the whole system was put in place, I think, for the right reasons and has done really well. But like all regulations, you've got to have a refresh. You've got to keep looking at them. You've got to think whether they're still current and whether they're still doing what they're set out to do. And I think even the president of UEFA has been in the press recently saying, yeah, they'll probably change. He's mentioned the word luxury tax. Now a luxury tax would probably be more proportionate than the hard break-even test they've got at the moment. So, we may see that in the future. It's all up in the air. And the way a luxury tax would work would be, okay, clubs have to live within their means, give or take those 30 million. But if your owner wants to put more money in than that threshold, for every euro he puts in, another euro has to go into a central pot that would get shared out amongst the other clubs. And this is what you see with some of the American sports. So I think it's still developing. You're right, Manchester City are the next ones up. They're at the CAS. They may go down that European challenge, competition law challenge. Interestingly, they've actually bypassed the adjudicatory chamber and have gone straight to CAS with the very first instance decision. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. So financial fair play, not going anywhere, I don't think. I think it might get a refresh, but it'll be interesting to see how Manchester City get on with UEFA.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Hi. My questions for the whole panel. My question's relating to the ISL and I-League issue that you guys spoke about earlier. A tough one. So has there been an issue like this in another country before? And if there has been, what has been the approach to solving it?
All right, we're going to lawyer you now. What issue are you talking about?
Okay. When two bodies are fighting for the spot to represent the country at an Asian stage, at a stage higher than their country. I mean, an AFC stage for that.
So two bodies. You mean two leagues are seeking to be recognised as the national top division league in one football association.
Yes,
that's essentially it. Look, this happened in Indonesia very famously from 2011 till about 2015, where there was a split within the Football Association, and what that led to was one party managing both the Football Association and the league, or through a private body managing the league, and then the same league being established on the side of the other league with similar clubs with similar branding in similar locations. You had two leagues competing for attention to be considered the national top division league. Where did that ultimately end up? Look, Indonesia was very, very different to India in the way it's structured and the way that that situation evolved. But ultimately, that situation led to Indonesia being suspended from international football. Indonesia was suspended by FIFA in 2015 for not respecting the principle of structural subordination and having more than one. But there's also the small matter of they also had a second body also calling themselves the Football Association of Indonesia. So they might have had two football associations there as well. But that's where ultimately, after 3 or 4 years of negotiations, that's where it ultimately ended up, because they couldn't separate that issue within Indonesia. Something very similar happened as well in Japanese basketball, of all sports, where you had two separate competitions, and then ultimately two separate basketball associations as well. And after that could not be resolved through stakeholder engagement, again, that ultimately led to the International Federation coming down with a hammer. I'm not saying that's going to happen in India, but just as an example, where you had two competing top division leagues, or two leagues competing to be recognised and registered as the top division league in a country, that has happened before, and Indonesia was the sort of most recent example of that happening in Asian football. Again, there's many, many differences. One's, when you look at the situations, but generally that's where that was.
Thank you. That's some good insight. Thank you.
Hi. So my question's directed partially to Mark and partially to John. This builds on the first question that you answered in terms of competitive balance, effectively, with financial fair play. And it took me back to a class during the FIFA Master where Andrea Traverso, who drove the mandate for financial fair play, was discussing the subject, and I broached it with him, saying, there are issues with competitive balance when it comes to financial fair play. And his simple response was, that's not something we are looking to solve through financial fair play. It was mainly to prevent clubs from going under. So do you think that, firstly, the UEFA should start looking into it as a model that should evolve to take care of competitive balance? And secondly, when you bring it back to India, do you think that, given the problems Indian football's faced in the I-League where clubs have gone under, that a closed model like the ISL is actually a good thing going forward? And that's probably something that John could touch upon, in terms of, because closed leagues have historically worked better, I'd say, than open ones to the financial aspect of clubs.
I think I can fully understand why UEFA is saying these regulations are not about competitive balance, because if you actually look at the objectives in the financial fair play regulations, they're all about financial health, effectively trying to make sure clubs are in a good place. And I think, there's still a definite place for that. I mean, where I am living in England right now, in Manchester, you've got Bolton Wanderers, who are one of the founding Football League clubs, and Bury, who are another one, both going through insolvency procedures, pretty much on their knees. So, there's still a massive struggle. In fact, in England, in the Championship, if you look at the Deloitte report, it's just total gambling. Of the teams that are in that league, they're spending, I think Birmingham have the record for last season, they were spending 200% of their turnover. So double what they actually make from TV, from ticket sales and commercial. They're spending twice that on players' wages. Totally unsustainable. And you've got almost every club in that league doing the same because they all want to get up to the promised land of the Premiership. So I still think there's a place for financial fair play regulations, and we have domestic financial fair play regulations in the Championship. They're just not particularly well policed. And maybe that's something, in India, that you need some financial fair play regulations there. It's almost to save the owners from themselves, because they can still be crazy. Is that ever going to deal with competitive balance? I'm not sure it is. It's got to be a totally different set of regulations, really, that are going to deal with it. But how do you sort of put the genie back in the bottle? Let's face it, in England, it's still pretty competitive. We talk about the Big Six, and a few years ago we saw Leicester break into it and win the title. To actually have 6 clubs fighting for the Premiership at the beginning of a season, which is about to start, isn't bad. I look at Italy, it's probably Juventus again this year. I look at Germany, if I was a betting man, I'd probably say Bayern are going to win it. If you look at France, I reckon Paris Saint-Germain. What do you reckon? You're going to win it? I mean, in those countries, you know who's going to win the league already. That's really bad. And the reason why it's better, I think, in England is because of the Premiership model of actually sharing revenues. So it's pretty much the top team will, for every pound the bottom team gets of broadcasting monies, they reckon the top team gets about £1.60. That's quite a tight model. So I think that's an area, if you want to look at keeping things competitive, you share the money out fairer. But I guess that's, in a way, is what a closed sport does. They share the revenues more. The top clubs will support the bottom ones. The bottom ones get the best new players coming in. So they try and give that equality. But if we still want to have promotion and relegation and that sort of competition, which we have in football, I think if you want to have a competitive balance, you've just got to share the broadcasting money out fairer.
In terms of specifically relating to India, I think it's incredibly difficult. I'm definitely on the side of experience / old age rather than youth, and I'm old-fashioned enough to like open leagues. I like promotion and relegation, but I come from a country where there's been years of tradition in that, and in particular in football. It's the biggest sport in the UK, and then you come to a country like India, and it's very easy, I think, to some extent, to look at the ISL and say, well, that's just franchised money, and really we should have the I-League. That's where the tradition is, and then you look at how the I-League was performing, and it wasn't really performing very well. If it had been performing in a stellar way, the ISL wouldn't have come along. In the States, they tried to crack football since I was a kid in the 70s. And economically, the MLS is working. The average, I think, in a study last year, the average value of an MLS franchise was $240 million, a top price, $330, something like that. So economically, that is working, and yet the US didn't qualify for the World Cup. You can't expect, I think, you certainly can't expect, if you think that it's going to take money in a country like India to kickstart, I suppose it depends what you're trying to achieve. If you think that your top-down approach and you're going to throw some money at sport, at football in a country like India, I think you probably have to have, for a period of time, a closed league, because it's unrealistic to expect companies to invest if relegation is effectively apocalyptic as far as their finances are concerned. In the UK, you get parachute payments at least. If you get relegated from the Premiership, if you get relegated from the Premier League in India to the second league, financial, that's probably ruinous. So I think if that's your goal, that you think throwing money at the top is the way to go, then I think you probably need a closed league. As I said when I spoke, I think right now it doesn't really make a difference what's on the top of Indian football, because there aren't enough good players to, in India's heyday, whenever that was, people talk about the golden years, EPL and La Liga, etc., weren't on TV at the same time. People aren't stupid, they look at La Liga and EPL, they look at the ISL or I-League for that matter, either, and neither compares. So until you sort out quality, and I think Indians, to me, will take pride in when Indians are great at football, and that's when they'll start watching whichever league is at the top, whether it's a closed league or an open league. But until Indians begin to get better and better at football, and I've no doubt they can, and hopefully will, then it really doesn't matter right now, because neither is going to be commercially successful, I suspect.
Good evening. My name is Arvind. If you may be allowed to ask two questions, one to Mark and one to John. So the first question to Mark is with respect to the first question to John, sorry. With respect to club licensing criteria like sporting, legal, financial, etc., do you think it might be advisable for FIFA and AFC to have like a different regulatory scenario for developing nations vis-a-vis a uniform structure, considering the monetary status of these nations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one-size-fits-all is an ideal, and it would be great if Indian clubs were able to comply fully with the club licensing regulations, but it's obvious they can't. So what do? Do you try and impose that on people, or do you actually recognise that differing countries are at differing stages in the development of both their economies, but also, of course, their sport? So, I think you have to be realistic in certain aspects. I think, there are other elements, for example, protection of minors, all those kinds of things, very important. To me, no kind of give way on that kind of thing. But club licensing and things, I think you have to be a bit pragmatic.
All right, thank you. So, question to Mark. Based on the many judicial precedents that we have in the CAS and FIFA DRC database, why do you think FIFA has not incorporated specific criteria of unilateral termination with just cause related infringements in like a wide umbrella clause?
I suppose it's so fact sensitive, isn't it? Is the issue. I mean, I suppose they've tried to, in the latest RSTP, bring in a couple of areas. So 2 months of non-payment, and you give a 15-day period to remedy is one of the examples. The other one is, as we talked about, is this abusive conduct. But what is abusive conduct? And what is 2 months' money? Because by the time some of these cases go to FIFA, what you tend to find is a club saying, well, actually, this player was really lazy, so I fined him every week when he didn't turn up for training, and the coach will back me up. I've got some evidence on this, so I don't actually owe him 2 months' money. I only owe him 1 month's money, and he walked out. He's in breach. Almost every case is different. They all have they're very fact sensitive. So it's not really possible, I don't think, for FIFA to put a long list of what is a breach of contract. You can sort of tell most of the time what a breach of contract is, but for those that you can't, you have to, I'm afraid, take them through the FIFA system, and some of them then find their way up to CAS. You then do get some jurisprudence, so it may be, well, this is the same scenario that I faced, is the one that somebody else faced, and it's in this particular award or decision. You can use those, but I just almost think it's impossible for FIFA to legislate for every single possibility. And looking at the way FIFA have dealt with their disciplinary code, I think what they're actually trying to do is make their regulations shorter rather than add to them, which I think is probably the right idea as well.
I think we had two more questions in it.
this is the question to the panel. Anybody could take this up. So the FIFA RSTP had introduced the transfer matching system. One of the primary objective of it was to keep a tabs on the transfer of minors. But is it curtailing the trafficking of minors from third world nations? That's my question. Because you see there are many agents with questionable character who are involving in trafficking. And is the transfer matching system going to play a part in that, in curtailing that?
Yeah, look, FIFA TMS does, just for those that don't know, FIFA's regulations require where there is an international transfer of an individual who, at the moment, I think the rule says 10 years old, there needs to be instructions put into the transfer matching system, the TMS, by the new club, the old club, the new federation and the old federation. And that ensures that everybody's on board with that transfer. Now, if that transfer relates to a minor, and under the FIFA regulations, minors are generally people who are under 18 years old. There's one exception for the European Union. Then before that transfer goes through the international transfer certificate system, there is a subcommittee of FIFA which assesses whether the application for the minor to transfer meets one of the exceptions. So there's a number of exceptions written in the regulations, and Mark just said FIFA doesn't want to make the regulations any bigger because they've also got a number of unwritten exceptions to the regulations, which unless you're working in the system, you don't really know about. So look, when the system is used and it's used properly, yes, it works. It avoids situations where minor players are potentially transferring internationally for the wrong reasons. But the situation you're talking about would never appear in FIFA TMS. So that situation is one where we had an example, and it's in the media, and you can read about it in Laos probably about 4 years ago, where a club owner decided to import about 30 or so young boys, I can't remember from which African country, between the ages of 14 and 16, on the pretense that they were coming to trial and play for his football club. And a couple of them played 1 or 2 matches. None of them, of course, had proper documentation and visas. And then they ultimately ended up being thrown out either onto the street or working illegally for one of his companies. And that took FIFA about 2 years to investigate, because that kind of thing is criminal activity. And that happens outside of the legitimate football operating systems. So, in that respect, it's difficult for a governing body like a FIFA or FIBA or FIVB or any other international sports federation that's governing a player transfer system to really go beyond the scope of that transfer system itself. So the activity which I just described, which happened in Laos, FIFA ultimately disciplined that individual and also the club and the federation for not properly applying the rules and regulations. But that took more than 12 months because they don't have the coercive powers that a state would have, that a police force would have, be able to investigate something across national borders. So what you're actually talking about is criminal activity, and it needs more than just a sports governing body implementing an electronic transfer system to actually stop. It needs work with the relevant state authorities in those countries, immigration authorities, and of course clubs and football associations doing the right thing. So I definitely see your point, because that's something that is often raised. The classic story of the dodgy Cameroonian agent bringing a whole bunch of kids to Belgium who just get dumped on the street, and they end up having to sell trinkets outside of... I've never been to Belgium, so I can't think of a Belgian place where they'd sell trinkets outside of. Sorry. Takes them to Paris and they sell trinkets outside of the Eiffel Tower or whatever, and those kids, their life ruined. That's not something that will come through TMS. That's the problem. So TMS can't do anything really to stop that unless it's actually being used in a proper way, which someone who's doing that would never do.
So there are certain rules that agents aren't allowed to take money. That agents aren't allowed to take money for the transfer of a minor. when they carry it out. Do you think that like such a restriction prevents people from investing in developing minors or from promoting competition in that area because you're not going to earn anything off it?
Well, I suppose in England we probably see maybe the better end of the minors. So you can see 16-year-old players playing for Liverpool. The one did the other day against Lyon. But you're right, the agent of that 16-year-old player can't get paid until the player's 18. There's some ways around it. I mean, if a player at 16 signs a 4-year contract with Liverpool, then the agent just gets paid in the last 2 years of that contract. They try and do things like this to get around it. But, I don't think agents should actually say, we're not going to act for young players because we can't make money off them now. It should be an investment. You should actually want to help a young player. And if you do the right thing and you actually help a player on his career path, then, okay, he might only be able to sign a 2-year rep agreement with you, but in 2 years' time, he should want to sign the next one because you've been a good agent, you've done the right thing. So it depends what type of agent you are. If you're an agent that just wants to make money now, short-term agents probably don't get involved with minors. If you're the agent that actually looks at working with a player to do the right things for that player and to help that player right the way through his career and beyond, we have lots of players who now on reality TV programs and become celebrities and things like that. Agents can still help. If you're one of those sort of agents, what have you got to fear? Do a good job and keep acting all the way through. That player will stay with you.
If I can add to that, if that's all right. When you're regulating, in a past life I used to draft and review regulations regularly for a living. When you're regulating, you always have to remember what is the policy which underdrives this regulation? What is my objective of what I'm trying to achieve here? And I think you mentioned it just before, and the question of minors also raises that point, is at the end of the day we have to remember when we're talking about 16-year-olds or whatever it might be, we're not talking about adults. Legally, we're not talking about adults. And, I think it's something that we can go back to and remember from those that might have studied family law. In Australia, family law, they just drum into you every day. Best interest of the child, best interest of the child, best interest of the child. And again, personally, I have no issue with, similar to Mark, I have no issue with there being a prohibition on an individual receiving money for brokering a contract for a minor player. And again, from what I've seen in the market and from attending AFC youth competitions during my time at the AFC, many of the good agents described their relationships with their clients who they weren't allowed to take money from exactly how Mark just described it, as an investment. We recognise the talent in this guy. Look, I'm helping him out. When he turns 18, hopefully he recognises that work, etc. But I also understand that, he has to be at the paramount of everything, every decision that's made about. It's not about me trying to make the most money for myself. I mean, that's a traditional fiduciary relationship anyway, isn't it? You act in the best interest of and best interest of the person that you're acting for. But the good ones follow that experience. So a lot of those regulations, when you read the FIFA regulations that deal with minors, come from that perspective. They're looking at it, what's in the best interest of the minor, of the child here. And that's something I think we always need to remember. Look, you got a 15 or 16-year-old kid who's playing in the Premier League, but at the end of the day, he's still a kid, right? At the end of the day, he's still a kid, and sometimes we forget that when young athletes are playing, adult sports. So, okay.
Thank you, guys. Another big round of applause for them. Louder, guys.
May I request Mr. Pratik Tiwari, Head of Insignia Preferred Banking at RBL Bank, to please present our panelists with mementos.